Hey there, it is so good to see you today. Thank you for making time to be with me today as we talk some more about iridology. While we are just getting started, I'd love it if you would hop into the chat box and say hello. Maybe give me a little bit about where you're at. I would actually love to know where you're from. And I would also love to know if you have any iridology training under your belt already. So if you would take a moment and find the chat box, that would be absolutely fantastic. There we go. We've just fixed the settings. So you should be able to post comments in the chat box. And there's Chana saying hello. So good to have you with us, Chana. Chana from Montana. I know that rhymes, right? And so thank you for that. Appreciate that. And would love to, again, have everybody weigh in. What you will find is the more you play with me in the chat box, the more you engage with me there, the more information you will get from me in our time together today. So please do say hello and let me know where you're from and what your background is, because that will also tell me how deep I can go today. All right. We need to start with this little disclaimer, as always, that what we do with iridology is never about diagnosing or prescribing. It is always about assessing and educating. And as such, whatever you learn from this webinar today is, it's up to you to decide how you're going to use it, and you are responsible for that. Just wanted to throw this out there that the next live course is starting today. And there is still one call slot, maybe two, left. If you are thinking you want to learn iridology, you want to study with me, take note of this URL that you see on the screen. And I'm going to pop that into the chat box as well. And hop over there right now and book that call slot for us to talk about your goals with iridology. And let's see if this is a good fit for you. We have Elsa joining us. She says she's a medical and natural doctor with 2 PhDs in quantum physics. I don't know much about iridology, mostly curious to see if it's valid. Love that, Elsa. Thank you for being open-minded enough to investigate this today. I am Judith Cobb. I am a master herbalist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, and I am also one of only 8 level 3 certified iridology instructors with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. I've been in the holistic health industry as a health coach for over 4 decades, and much of what I teach is based on that experience, as well as, of course, proven iridology facts. So if you've already got a college level anatomy and physiology course under your belt, maybe you have a license as a registered nurse or an LPN or an ND or an MD or an LMT or a PT or an EMT, and you are looking to learn more about iridology and to see if this course is a good fit, again, feel free to use that link to schedule a time for us to talk about iridology and your goals and whether this program is actually a good fit for you. You may already know, if you've been with me for a while on a few of these, that I only accept 10 students per class. And so the fact that we actually have a spot left is your opportunity to sneak in, right? And get in under the wire. When we look at iridology, and we often work off photographs, we need to understand that there are limitations with iridology. You will see a lot of people online posting before and after photos and claiming that what they've done, you know, the herbs they took or the diet they followed, whatever, is what has led to the changes in their eyes. I want you to get a really good look at these photos you see on the camera, on the screen, because I'm going to show you some more photos of this exact person again. These are the same eyes. All right, those are the same eyes. What has changed? 18 months between the photos you saw on the previous screen and the photos you're looking at now. What has changed? What has changed? Chana has got it right. She says the light is what has changed. The light and the camera. This image was an 8 megapixel digital camera back when 8 megapixels was state of the art. This is a 24 megapixel digital camera. And again, the lighting is different. This was an incandescent flash. This is an LED flash. And so when we are looking at before and after pictures and claiming, oh, look at, you've done so much cleansing, you've done so much good work, look at how your eyes are blue or your eyes are brighter, that is garbage. Always look first at the technology that was used. Are the photographs taken with the same camera under the same lighting conditions? If the camera was run on batteries, were the batteries at the same level of power, right? We need to understand all of these things because in truth, they're from one iris to the other. In this case, there was no change in the actual iride itself. There was only change in the technology. So we need to really be aware of that. And we need to make sure that we are being honest in how we are portraying iridology and what it is capable of. It breaks my heart that there are people out there who would say, oh, you know, I did cleanse and look at my eyes are so much brighter and clearer now, because that is total garbage, total garbage. So a better question to ask isn't, can we do a before and after photo? And can the diet change what we see in the eyes? Better question is, what changes can we see in the irides and what do those changes mean, right? The quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. Do you agree with that? If you agree with that, give me a yes in the comments box. Yes, quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. Thank you, Chana. And Marissa, thank you for saying yes there. And anybody else who wants to say yes, go ahead and say that. Great question too. Is the person feeling better? Yes, that is another fantastic question. That's a much better way of gauging progress than to hope that you will see changes in the color of the iris. So I've been an iridologist for, like I said, over 4 decades. And the first 10 years of that, I was trained as a North American iridologist. Some people would call it a Jensenian iridologist. And after 10 years, I was just about ready to quit. I was about ready to throw in the towel and walk away because I had put clients on high-powered cleanses. We had done radical dietary work with them, and we never saw the eyes change the way I had taught they would, the way I had been taught they would change. And that made it really frustrating for me to say, you do this diet, your eyes are going to turn blue. And they never did. You do this diet and there's all this toxicity we see in your eyes, it's going to clear up. It never did, right? And the more I worked with it, the more frustrated I got. And the more I thought, this is garbage. And this is a part of what makes people question whether iridology is valid, right? Because they aren't getting the changes they've been promised. They aren't getting the changes that people are posting online. That was when I was blessed to begin learning constitutional iridology. And the more I studied it, the more it made sense, the easier it was to do an excellent iris reading and iris analysis. And the more beneficial it was for my clients, because I wasn't doing this to try to make their eyes change. I was doing it to help them improve their health and to guide them based on what their eyes were, the clues their eyes were giving us, to help them just take control of their health. So are you ready to learn about constitutional iridology and what it teaches about why and how irides change? If you are ready for that, give me ready in the comments box. You ready? Fantastic. So one of the things, and again, if there's more of you who are ready than just Chana, and Chana, thank you for that, and Marissa, thank you for that. Play with me in the sandbox. The more of you that do, the more information you'll get from me. Change number 1 is pigment may be acquired or become more dense. Okay. And so we are talking specifically about the iris here. I love Trisha's question. She says, I have a clearer sclera with the lymph and liver work I've been doing. And I can't remember the last time I've had bloodshot eyes, previously very prone. And absolutely, because the sclera is dynamic. The iris is inherited. And so you can see certain types of change in the sclera. You will not see those kinds of changes in the iris. So that's a really, really great point to bring up, Trish, and you are welcome for that clarification. So we may see more pigment. Pigment may be acquired over time, and we may see pigment become more dense. So let's look at what we mean. These, again, we're not calling these before and after photos because we know they were taken with different cameras. This was a print film camera with an incandescent flash. This was the 24 megapixel camera with an LED flash. So we can't say before and after as a response to what this client was doing for their health. What we can see, however, is that in the intervening years, these were taken about 20 years apart. When we look here between about 30 minutes and about 37, well, actually up to about 42 minutes, we don't see any of this shady pigment in the original photo. But in the more recent photo, we do. So this is an example of pigment building in the eye. Pigment builds in the eye because of genetic cues, right? Just like your hair color changes over years because of your genes, partially because of nutrition, but largely because of genes, right? If you're going to get gray hair, you're going to get it at some point in time. And so when we look at this, we see that 20 years ago, we didn't have the pigment. Now he's got the pigment. And this is going to give us various types of information. Now, we do want to ascertain, are these actually the same photo? The color is so radically different. So let's look for markings. This and this. I use a handheld camera, and I've tucked it away because I had my office manager was working at my desk. And so my photos are not always perfectly level, right? It's a good thing I'm not a pilot, but you will see we've got the marking at on the superior margin. We've got markings here on the lower area. We've got, again, this sitting right in here. And they look a little different from one photo to the next because of the pupil size. This is a really important thing. When I first learned iridology, we would have said, oh, look at your healing. Look at this lacuna is smaller now, you're healing. We were never taught that pupil size would affect the appearance. When the pupil is large, the iris tissue is compressed. So think of this as being like a balloon. And if you've got a balloon filled with air, you can squish it end to end, and it makes it look like the shape is changing, but the volume has stayed the same. When we stretch that balloon out, we still have the same volume, but it looks like the shape has changed. Does that make sense? That what we're looking at here is not about healing, it's about pupil size. Large pupil, tissue compressed, these markings will look fatter. Small pupil, tissue stretched out, these features will look longer and narrower. So as we've ascertained, we've got the same landmarks, same eye, fantastic. We've even got this one squiggly little fiber down here in both eyes. We know it's the same eye. And so when we see this, and we note that we've got pigment here, we see this pigment has acquired over time. What does this mean? This means, number one, the color of the pigment is going to tell us which organ genetically wants to be causing stress. The placement of the pigment, so the second point is the placement of the pigment tells us which organs are going to have to suffer that stress. Okay, so that pigment gives us some really good information about which organ we want to be asking questions about, what kinds of symptoms we might see because of it, because of the organ itself that wants to be out of balance, and the organs that it wants to have an impact on. Does that make sense? that as we acquire pigment, it tells us where genetically the body may want to be having problems. Now, Chana has asked, do some people acquire pigment at a faster rate than others? Is it an inherent predisposition, or does everyone have the potential to acquire pigment over time? Oh, those are good questions. I don't know that I've got the best answers for you, Chana. I love this when people ask me hard questions. Yes, some people do acquire pigment very quickly. And remember, while this is under genetic influence, what are the things that influence our genes? Often it's our nutritional status and the stress levels and the emotional garbage we're carrying, right? And so that can be a suggestion that you might acquire pigment more quickly than others. Everybody has the potential to acquire pigment. Some people don't acquire pigment, and that might be because they have less of a potential, or they may be doing more things well for their body. Trish is asking, can the yellow be an indication of stagnant lymph? No, not necessarily. The yellow indicates, can suggest many things. It does not specifically suggest stagnant lymph. Okay. Here's another example, photos taken approximately 20 years apart. Again, different cameras. And so as we look at this, we want to look and see, do we have any of the same markings? So let's look for this fiber right here, and that fiber is sitting right here. So that is a really good indication, because that's it's an unusual fiber, and we're seeing it in both eyes. We have another unusual fiber here, and it is showing up here. So we know this is the same eye, different cameras. Let's look and see, this pigment, that pigment should be sitting right in here. And it wasn't 20 years ago, right? We see this pigment, which should be tucked in right in here, wasn't there 20 years ago. This pigment, which should be sitting right here, wasn't there 20 years ago. Even these little bits of dotty pigment, I call it splatter pigment, that's not an official term, don't put that on a test. They should be sitting in here, and they're not. So this again is pigment that has been acquired. Now, this is a person who between this age and this age, this was taken when he was a young teen, this was taken about 20 years later, so he was in his early 30s. And in those intervening years, he had a few rough years where he was not taking good care of his body at all. And knowing the genetic history of his family, I know his parents, I know his grandparents. I know what some of the weak links are in the family genetically. And it makes complete and total sense that his body, because of the stress he put it under, would trigger the genes that would allow these pigments to form. And that it would specifically allow these pigments to form in these areas, because again, this color tells us which organ was stressed, wants to be out of balance the most, and where the pigment is sitting tells us which organ will suffer for that. Once the pigment has settled into the eye, it is not going to dissolve. This is not a reversible situation. The iris is very stingy. When it has accumulated something, it's not giving it back. What colors are associated with what organs? Oh, many colors associated with many organs. And that is a part of what we learn in the dynamic iridology assessment system, so that we can actually begin to correlate and understand at that deep level. This is why anatomy and physiology is so important. I'll give you one little clue. Brown is always about liver. Brown is always about liver. Liver does over 500 different jobs. Can the liver affect any organ it wants, any tissue it wants? Oh yeah, it can. And so this is where you have to understand the liver. You have to understand anatomy and physiology to say, okay, so this is a left iris, which it is. And we are looking at this pigment, which is sitting right here. that is sitting, if we're 35 minutes, 25 minutes, about 22 minutes, that is sitting at the top of this is a young man, this is the top of the testy. What influence can liver apply on the testy? How can the liver mess things up for the testicle, right? And when we understand that, we then understand what we need to do. And Chan is totally on track. She says, always nice to give the liver a little extra love, always nice, because it's a hard worker, and liver is going to have a huge impact on hormones. Exactly. So are we going to work on the testes here, testicle? Not necessarily. We might want to give it a little love, but more important to come back and figure out what in heaven's name is going on with the liver. Why does the liver want to misbehave? Is it dietary? Is it emotional? Was it something this fellow ingested that wasn't really dietary? And when we know that, then we understand how to support the liver. And as we support the liver and then give the testy just a little bit of love, we don't see the pigment dissolve, but we do see the testy and the liver begin to perform better. So again, the pigment, the fact that pigment has developed, has settled into the iris, tells us that there is an organ that wants to be out of balance. It wants to struggle. Where that pigment settles in the eye tells us which organ is going to suffer for it. This is not a buildup of toxins. This is a genetically programmed glitch, if you will, a genetically programmed event. And when we understand that, we can work with it. So again, this one is suggesting some liver, and we want to make sure that any recommendations we give this young man are going to be liver supportive. And we might be giving food ideas, dietary ideas. We might want to use some supplements with him for a while he's getting his food intake balanced out properly. We might want to give him some emotional homework. The emotions have a huge impact on the body. We may, again, want to also support the testicle and help it not want to be cranky. Another change we can see is what we call a lipemic diathesis. This is actually not in the iris at all. This is in the cornea. So if you remember your eye anatomy, you've got your eyeball with the iris, and then you have the anterior chamber, and then you have the cornea sitting on top of that. So there's that gap between the cornea and the iris. We're looking at the cornea itself. The cornea, again, is very stingy. When it has absorbed something, it's not going to give it away, not going to give it back. It's not going to let it go. So this, again, we rarely see this in people under the age of 20. If we see it in people that are that young, we have a serious conversation. There's some work that there's some lab testing specifically that needs to be done. We often see this in people over 60 years of age. And so we need to know the onset of this to know how much weight to give it. If we've got eye photos of someone, when they're in their 40s and in their 50s, and now they're into their 60s, and they're just starting to show a little hint of this, it may be nothing to be concerned about. It just may be the cornea aging. If we see it younger than age 60, and especially if it is prominent like this, we need to have a conversation, because this suggests, again, that there is an imbalance, that it is likely has to do with liver enzymes and liver not dealing with carbohydrates properly. And again, when you know your anatomy and physiology, you understand if the liver's not managing its carbs properly, it can take you down some pretty nasty paths that we want to intervene in. And we want to really interrupt that process. So a lipemic diathesis may appear. Some people never develop a lipemic diathesis, but you might see it the early stages, and over time you might see it becoming more prevalent, going all the way around the eye. You may see it becoming more opaque. You might see it becoming wider. And again, that would be a change that we might see over time. Okay. Again, triggered by how the body's functioning and some genetic cues that are happening. Pupil shape may change. This is an interesting one. Not all pupils are round, and that's really important to note. The pupil shape, the inner edge of the iris or that outer edge of the pupil, however you want to look at this, has some cells that are directly connected to the nervous system and to the spinal column. And when we see the pupil is not round, it correlates to spinal misalignment and to nerve feed in the body. When we see a flattening like this, it suggests that there's a long-standing spinal subluxation. This is a sign that can be changed because it's actually not inherent. It is dynamic. So, if someone has had a long-standing spinal misalignment and they are willing to do the homework, do the chiropractic, the physiotherapy, the acupuncture, the exercises, they can begin to correct that spinal alignment, and over time, the pupil will become round again. It takes time. For a pupil to flatten like this, that spine has been misaligned for many, many years. You're not going to fix it in one chiropractic session and one massage. It's going to take a lot of work. And again, we don't want to do the work just to make the pupil go round. I mean, what a silly reason to do it. We want to do it because if the pupil's not round, there will be spinal misalignments, which means there will be impingements on the nerve feeds going into and out of the spinal cord, which means that organs are not going to be able to work at their optimal capacity. In working to get that pupil to be round over years, we then improve the nerve feed. And that improves how the organs that are attached to those particular nerves work. And that's what we want, right? Marissa is, let's go to Chana first. Would the pupil show anomalies with paraplegia and quadriplegia? That's a good question. I've never had the privilege of working with a paraplegic or a quadriplegic. So I would imagine it would depend on why they had paraplegia or quadriplegia, right? That would be interesting. Does the area of misalignment determine the flattening of the pupil edge? It absolutely does. We have maps of the of the pupil, and we know that flattenings in certain areas correlate to subluxations in specific areas, right? Really, really interesting information. We see changes in the sclera. Again, the iris is genetic. What it accumulates, it's not going to give up. It's going to hold on to that. What the cornea accumulates, it's going to hold on to. The sclera, however, as we mentioned earlier, is an entirely different story. Blood vessels become obvious at certain points in time, and they may or may not change depending on what you do. So you'll remember this was one of the first photos we looked at. I want you to look in this sclera here, look in this upper corner, and you'll see this blood vessel coming along here. This blood vessel is right here. So notice that in 1997, it was very bright and very prominent. Also, we've got the beginning of the Harry Potter scar, I call it, right here. And it was a little bit softer looking. 20 years later, this blood vessel has softened significantly, which means there's been some good work. But this one, the Harry Potter scar, has become a little more prominent. So something there is going backwards. It's losing integrity. So constitutional iridologists always observe the sclera as well as the iris. So again, the iris is genetic, it's inherent. It's what your previous 3 generations behind you that preceded you, what they've gifted you with. The sclera is what you're doing with it. So when we see blood vessels and other markings becoming prominent in the sclera, it warns us of things that are going on now. And it might be just starting, it might be subclinical, there may be no symptoms, but there is a warning flag in the sclera. Sometimes the problem has been there long enough that the person actually does have physical symptoms, and we've got this sclera to prove that there's an imbalance. You've got the symptom that correlates with that. When we couple that with what we see genetically in the eye and with their diet and lifestyle, we can almost always understand why the thing that we're seeing in the sclera is there. And it helps us to understand what we can do to begin to backtrack the thing that's in the sclera. In order to do sclerology well, you do need to have good quality photos, and you want to be taking them at regular intervals. I usually suggest with my clients that we should be doing their photos about annually so that we can monitor any pigment accumulation and any sclera changes. So ways irides do not change. This is so important. When I first learned iridology, like 1979, 1980, we were taught that when we saw lines like this, it meant that healing was happening. We actually called these healing lines. And we taught our clients that as we saw these healing lines, it was a good thing. Trick was, we didn't have photos before this set. How did we know what was in this space 5 years ago? We had no way of proving that there was nothing in there. We were shooting photos once. So we didn't have a tracking on this. What we now know is we know that the iris itself is made up of layers. It's a trabecular network. And that means that there are layers of fiber, layers of these threads in the eye. The way we see, the way these fibers appear, the way they're sitting in the eye is inherently determined. It's not determined at random. We don't get to change these. These are, every thread you see here is just the way the DNA of this body says it's supposed to be. When we see threads in a space like this, we are actually looking at one layer lower. So that top layer has a separation in the fibers, and we're looking at the fibers down one level. That's all we're looking at. This is not about healing. This simply means that the top layer of fiber is missing, and we're looking down a layer. All it means. This can tell us that there is an inherent predisposition towards a challenge with whatever organ is in this area of the eye, is represented in this area of the eye. And again, we aren't going to just say, oh, you've got a problem there. We want to ask, we want to find out, does the client have any symptoms that would correlate to this area? Maybe this client actually is doing all kinds of good stuff, and they are preventing problems in this area from manifesting because they've got the right diet, they've got the right supplements, they've got the right lifestyle, they're really caring for their body. So this doesn't mean there is an active problem. It means there is a potential for a problem. And we need to be asking questions here. Lacunae do not get smaller. We kind of touched on this earlier when we talked about pupil size. Again, 3 images of the same eye. These were all taken on the same day. I got a new camera and I was playing around. I wanted to compare how the old camera and the new camera would work. And I wanted to have images of some eyes that were taken on the very same day so that we could see exactly what the comparisons would be. So remember that when the pupil is large, iris tissue gets compressed. That's going to make these gaps look fatter, wherever we are in that circle, they're going to look fatter. as the pupil gets smaller, we see these shapes starting to elongate. So elongate from the pupil to the iris limbus. When the pupil is at its smallest, that shape will be its longest from the pupil to the iris limbus. So what this means is that this is not monitoring health. This is monitoring how much light did you use. That's all it's monitoring. And how responsive is the pupil to that amount of light. These two photos were taken just in rapid succession. You do the photo first with that flash, and the pupil is going, okay, she's going to do that again. We're going to be a little bit smaller just in case she does that again. And that's why the pupil here is a little smaller than it was in the first go round. So we want to be very aware that we cannot monitor health improvements through the irides because the fibers don't move and pigment does not disperse. We don't move fibers around. We monitor health symptoms, and that's how we know if the person is improving. Or my clients frequently bring in their medical lab tests, right? And we can compare what was your cholesterol 6 months ago to what is it now? What was your cortisol 6 months ago to what is it now? And we begin to do, what were your liver enzymes 6 months ago? What are they now? And that will always correlate with improved senses of well-being if their lab tests are improving. We absolutely do not ever do iridology to change the eye color. We do it to assess health potentials. We do it to see where are the possible weak links. How can we support this person and help them avoid the pitfalls that their body would like to have should they decide to live on a junk food diet? All right. Does that all make sense? If that all makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. Let me know that this is making sense. Makes sense? Is some of this different information from what you've seen on social media? If it is, give me the word different in the comments box. Just want to assess what your background is, because if this is different, you might be feeling uncomfortable with this. Chenna says she's getting used to it. Love it. Love it. Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on this and let me know, is this different from what you've learned or what you've heard before? Again, you're liable to feel a little uncomfortable if you're going, but that's not what so-and-so said on Facebook, or that's not what so-and-so says on Instagram. Okay. Again, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've studied many different styles, and the first one that I taught was eyes change based on your diet. We can clean up these eyes. We can get rid of this pigment. Your eyes look toxic. And that was not accurate. And I've proved that over the last 30 plus years of doing constitutional. Fantastic. I love what Chana says. It has challenged me, but that's how we grow. Love it. Love it. So again, just throwing in that little reminder, just as we're ready to wrap up, that the next live course does start today. There's a couple of call slots left for between now and 2 hours from now, actually between noon, which is in 20 minutes where I live. And if you think, yeah, I really think I want more information on this, and if you've got a college level anatomy and physiology course already under your belt, I only teach health professionals. I don't teach people iridology as a hobby. If you want a hobby, go read a book. If you want to learn how to do this clinically, then we should have a conversation. And let's see if this is a good fit for you. Chana is saying, I highly recommend booking a call with Judith. Thank you, Chana. Is there any research published on this or data-based books? Elsa, those are great questions. What you will find is the books that have been published are 99% based on the Jensen method, which again has proved ineffective, but there are some diehard followers of that style. There is research ongoing, some interesting research from an iridologist and naturopath in California who is doing some 23andMe work and correlating that to specific markings and finding a high correlation, but I don't believe he's actually published it as a paper. He shares it at iridology symposiums. And so, yeah, I don't know of any hardcore data-based books. Chana says Judith has an excellent book included in her course. Thank you, Chana. Also really important to know that iridology changes. And also this probably will resonate with you because you've got a lot of training in lots of fields under your belt already. Science is the art of asking questions. And when people are asking questions and doing research, they'll come up with the hypothesis and they will often provide data to prove that hypothesis. Over time, as more people gather more data, they prove that the original hypothesis was faulty and the original data was flawed. And so they build on it. I have seen such an evolution in iridology over the last 4 decades, from what we believed as Jensenian iridologists to what is now coming out in various places in research. You will find there was a study done in, I want to say it was the late 1980s, maybe the 1990s, where iridologists were challenged to diagnose a disease from an iris analysis. And they were specifically supposed to diagnose whether somebody had gallstones or not. So many flaws with that. And that is the study that so many people say this proves iridology doesn't work. Number one, iridology never names a disease. It only shows us which organs are at risk for something to go wrong. That doesn't mean that a person can't earn problems in areas that have no indicators. Right? You treat your body poorly, you can break down any part of it, whether your body genetically was supposed to break down there or not. Right? So that's one thing. And the second thing is, so we never diagnose, and we never, ever, ever would try to assess something that doesn't have a genetic root. Gallstones are not genetic. The gallstone itself isn't rooted in your DNA. So how could you see it? It's like you cannot see if a person has broken their arm based on looking at their irides, because the broken arm doesn't change their genetic structure. Right? And so those are some flaws in the popular studies that are always referred to. And it's very frustrating. Flip that around. And to the other side, where the number of clients I've had who've brought in lab tests and we've looked at their eyes, and I've asked them, has your doctor run tests in this direction? No, they haven't. I would like you to go back and ask your doctor for these specific kinds of blood tests. I can't requisition tests. I'm not a doctor. And the client will go back to the doctor. They'll ask for those tests and they'll get the results back. And 9 times out of 10, I'm on the right path, that there's an imbalance there. And so, it's really easy for us then to get a direction. Elsa's saying there's not much that is genetically inherited. Less than 5% of chronic diseases are. Yeah, as far as chronic diseases go, but the tendencies towards tissue breakdown and tissue weaknesses is what we're looking at primarily in an iris. We're not looking for a genetically inherited disease. We are looking for a potential. And again, this is where understanding anatomy and physiology comes into play, because when you see markings in different areas and you understand how those organs work together or work against each other, it gives you the understanding of what you might need to do to nurture the body along to help it to reduce its risk of breaking down in those areas. So a very different approach from what I learned originally 4 decades ago. and one that works so well clinically, to help guide how we coach our clients. And so very, very helpful that way. Thank you so much for the interaction in the chat box today. That is just amazing. I really appreciate that. That fuels me. And best way to reach out to me if you've got questions of a general type. Actually, I would suggest, Elsa, even if you just want to ask those general types of questions, yeah, you know what? I will grab your email address off of your registration and I'll reach out to you and send you a way to reach me. Because of course we can talk about a little bit, we can spend some time talking about the theory and things like that and the practical application. And I can share some examples with you privately if you would like. Alrighty, so with that, my friends, we are done for today. Thank you so much for being with me. And I look forward to seeing you at the next mini class. Take care and have a good one. Bye for now.